Welcome to the American Hospital Association's webinar for trustees on building and maintaining your best board. I am pleased to introduce our presenter. Dottie Schindlinger is the Governance Technology Evangelist and a founding team member of Board Effect, where she promotes the intersection of governance and technology as a leading expert in the field. Dottie researches governance trends and writes and speaks for a variety of publications and organizations. Her career has included roles as varied as program development with the Pennsylvania Humanities Council, Director of Training and Education for the Nonprofit Center at LaSalle University, and Associate Faculty of LaSalle's Communication Department, where she taught public speaking to incoming first-year students. Dottie currently serves on the boards of the Alice Paul Institute and the Alliance for Board Effectiveness. It is now my pleasure to turn the floor over to Dottie Schindlinger.
Thank you so much for joining us, and it's really nice to have an opportunity to speak with you all today about this topic of how to build and maintain the best board possible for your hospital, for your healthcare system. So what we're going to cover in this session is really a little bit of information about the ongoing cycle of activities that are involved in not only planning and recruiting for the best board that you can possibly have, but the ongoing process of ensuring those individuals can operate at absolute peak productivity and efficiency, that they're highly engaged in the work that they are doing, and that they are able to demonstrate results in terms of what they've been able to give back to the institution. So we're going to talk about this whole process from start to finish, and we'll spend a little bit of time on each topic, but the most important thing to know about this process is that there really is no finite start and end. It really is an ongoing cycle. And so as we go through this material, I want to really challenge you to think of it in that way. I think sometimes many of us who do the work of governance think about recruitment as sort of an episodic activity. We're getting ready to fill some open board seats, and so we look around and try to figure out who we need, and that's really the one time of year that we start to think about things like recruitment and planning for recruitment. But we're going to really look at this more as an ongoing set of activities and how these four different types of activities flow from one to the other. So there really is no particular start point and end point. It really is kind of an ongoing cycle. And so just to start this out, I always like to provide a little bit of context before we dive into the material. And I think, nothing that I'm going to have on this slide here is going to be all that new to anybody who's probably watching this webinar. Basically, there are a number of things happening right now that are making the process of identifying members for our board and deciding what kinds of skill sets and what kinds of expertise we need from our members much, much more challenging. It is a really hard job to be a healthcare board member right now. Particularly at the moment in time that we're recording this webinar, we are still not entirely sure what's going to be happening on the national scene in terms of healthcare policy, in terms of the Affordable Care Act. Things are very much up in the air right now. And even if you're watching this at a time where those things have been settled, one thing we can certainly say is that we're in an era in history where there's a lot of volatility, uncertainty, complexity, and ambiguity, not just in our economy, but certainly in our healthcare space. And so that landscape is continuing to change and evolve rapidly. And board members have to be nimble. They have to know a lot about what is happening at their hospitals, what's happening in the broader environment, in the healthcare landscape, certainly what's happening in their communities in order to be able to do their jobs most effectively. And the other thing that I think is certainly true and is probably not going to become any less true anytime soon is that the very best candidates are the ones that have the least amount of time available to spend with us. I think there's sort of an old joke for those of us that do governance work that if you want to find the best board member, find someone that doesn't have time to join your board. They tend to be in hot demand. So time is one of those things we can't ever make more of, and so we have to find ways to enable board members to give us the best productivity, to give the best of themselves in the least amount of available time, and that is really just true. It's also true that our stakeholders expect more of our leadership these days. Our patients, our communities, our clients, our customers, they're really expecting us to be on our A game, those of us who serve on boards. They want us to be able to communicate what value we're bringing to their lives, not just how many of them we are serving. and whether or not we have, good control on infection rates and mortality rates and re-hospital admission rates and things like that. But they really want to know, what positive impact are we making in community health? How are we impacting the lives of those that we serve? Those are very different questions than maybe boards had to deal with in years past. And so this job of being a good board member has just gotten harder with basically every passing year. I love this quote from Gary Hamel because to me this kind of encapsulates what we are living through and what we are probably likely to continue living through for a good time to come. The world is becoming more turbulent faster than most organizations are becoming more resilient. And that nicely encapsulates the problem that faces all of us. We have to be resilient. We have to be nimble to succeed in this environment. We are likely to perish if we are not able to pivot quickly because things change so fast. And I think right now there's so much uncertainty of how things are going to change. It makes it really tough to make decisions, especially any sort of longer-term decisions. If we're trying to do planning on anything more than, let's say, a 6-month to 12-month basis, it's becoming almost impossible to know what is going to happen in that period of time and to know whether the assumptions under which we made decisions today are going to have any bearing on what's true 6 to 12 months from now. That's a really challenging environment. And so the hospitals and the organizations generally that will win in that kind of an environment of uncertainty are those that are nimble, are those that have leadership that are so close to the information, they're so deep in on their understanding of the situation that they can pivot quickly. And so that might mean that we need to look for different things in terms of board participation. We might be looking for different kinds of people than we maybe have had in the past. So when we think about this process, this sort of 4-part cycle of board development, the first thing we want to do is really get clear about our needs. Certainly it's a good idea to go back to our strategic plans and find out what did we say are the top priorities for this hospital, for this healthcare system in the next, X number of months, hopefully within the next year. And what are the specific opportunities and constraints? And if we don't really know what the opportunities and constraints are right now, maybe we can at least identify the biggest areas of opportunity and the biggest areas of potential risk. And once we sort of have that understanding, then we can go back and say, okay, we kind of get the kinds of voices we might need to have around the board table. Now let's take a look at what our current profile matrix includes. So we want to do a review of who currently serves on the board, what kinds of skill sets do they bring to the table, what does our demography look like? We want to make sure that we are accurately reflecting the interests of the stakeholders that we're serving. And then where's the gap? So where are those gaps? Let's do that analysis. Let's figure out what we're really looking for. Technology can certainly help you in this regard. If you can collect all that kind of information on kind of an ongoing basis, maybe renew it, every couple of quarters. Every time you have a new person join the board, make sure that you update that profile and that information. You can always sort of have a rolling forward gap analysis so you can really help to zero in on the kinds of people you should be talking to, the sorts of skill sets, the sorts of backgrounds that you really want to try to attract to your board membership. And then most importantly, you want to clarify exactly what you're asking someone to do. So if you've identified what you need, that answer is probably not going to be the same every single year. Different people rotate off the board each year. And so you want to make sure that you are coming up with a fresh set of job descriptions and job duties specific to that particular board seat that you're trying to fill. The idea being, you're always going to be looking for a little bit of a different nuance almost every year that you go through the recruitment process. And so really, recruitment should never end. You should always be telling people, always serving as an ambassador for the kinds of individuals that you need on your board, what you're really looking for, and you should be giving the most current information each time you do that. So very, very helpful to have written job descriptions for board members and update those as those needs change. And then the process for someone to become a board member, keep that as simple as possible. You want as many people as possible sharing information about the needs of your board, the needs of the healthcare system, and really helping people to become part of this process and know very easily, very quickly how to apply, how to put their name in the hat. If you have board members that are being appointed by local officials, you want to make it easy for people to suggest themselves as a possible name that you might provide to those elected officials as a potential, appointment to your board. And obviously, most elected officials are going to be very appreciative if you come to them and say, look, we've done this gap analysis. Here are the things we're really looking for. And here's a list of 10 names of people that we've vetted that really fill this particular set of needs. Now, we don't expect that you will necessarily pick from this list, but we wanted to make sure that we gave you some information that you could use or not use, but at least kind of show you what we're thinking. Most elected officials are extremely appreciative of that, particularly because they have so many appointments to fill that anyone that does homework for them is going to be, very much appreciated. And so even if they don't pick 100% of your slate, they might pick most of the slate. Or they might just say, great, and pick a few names from the list. So it's definitely worth it to do this work. In terms of some of the specific tactics that you might use, there are a lot of online and external resources that you can turn to for assistance. If you're not currently working with recruiters to fill open board seats, depending on the size and the complexity of the number of seats open, that might be a really good idea. Certainly you should turn to the American Hospital Association. They have a wonderful new website. It's their trustee resource website where they just have a plethora of information around board development. There's so much good stuff there, everything from sample board profile matrices to guidance around how to work with recruiters to you name it. There's a lot there that you can read through and chew on and samples that you can use. So there's a lot of really good resources that you can leverage. But even if you don't work with a recruitment firm or accept placements, LinkedIn now has a service that they offer that allows you to search for prospective board candidates. People can put information into their profiles about their board service experience, and you can search that information. And if you're a nonprofit hospital, you can also post for open board seats, I think for relatively little or maybe even no cost. So it's worth it to take a look at some of these resources that are available. I mean, most of these, are free, and then recruiters obviously may not be free, but for open board seats, especially if it's a nonprofit appointment, may not cost a fortune. There certainly are services out there that can help you. Again, as we mentioned, it's a very good idea to provide specific guidance to elected officials if you do receive appointments on your board. And then finally, this is an idea that comes out of a group called Blue Avocado based out in California. They wrote this article a number of years ago. This was Jan Masioka as the author. And the idea is called the Blue Ribbon Nominating Committee. And I've been through this process myself a couple of times. It's particularly helpful when the list of candidates that you have in mind has become a little too narrow. Maybe you're in a small, maybe even a rural community where it's kind of the same people that are always up for board service every year. They kind of come on and off, and it's rotating among the same small group of people. And you really want to find a way to widen that circle and find some new people that maybe have never served before, and especially those that have skill sets, and you don't really have names that fit that criteria. So what you can do is you can think about individuals that you would love to have on your board, absolutely love to have them say yes, but for a variety of reasons they just can't possibly do it. Either they're too busy, or maybe they've served on your board before and they're not eligible for re-election. For whatever reason, they're probably not going to say yes. But what you can do is ask them to serve on a thing called the Blue Ribbon Nominating Committee. And the idea is that committee meets exactly one time for 90 minutes. So you're just asking them to meet once, and maybe you serve them breakfast or lunch. And the idea is that you bring these individuals together, and at that session, you share with them what your critical path is. What are the big rocks that you're trying to move as an institution? And then you share with them the criteria for the board seats that you are about to have open or plan to have open. What are the kinds of people that you need? And then you get them to come up with a list of names. It's a way to greatly expand your circle of names. And then you now also have someone who's probably fairly well respected in the community whose name you can drop as the person that suggested this candidate for board service when you contact the candidate. So it's a very good way to just increase that pipeline. And then, of course, we can always use our committees as a pipeline for new potential board candidates. Most importantly, I always recommend that you think about having even just a 5-minute update on recruitment activities at every board meeting. Recruitment really should be kind of everybody's job, but should be spearheaded by the governance committee. If you don't have currently a governance committee, maybe you've got a nominating committee, that's fine. But you really want to have a committee that is in charge of making sure that this is happening. But it really should be everyone's job to think about, here's the list of criteria we're trying to meet. Here are the kinds of candidates we need. And please go out into the community and help us find the right candidates for this list. Everyone should be doing something around that, and a 5-minute update on every board agenda is going to make sure that it actually kind of starts to happen. And really, that update should be, okay, what have we done since the last meeting on identifying some new prospective candidates either for committees or for the board, or reaching out into the community for new connections that will lead to either new committee members or board members. So those are just a few suggestions around recruitment tactics. And then as you begin to find candidates, a tactic that is also particularly helpful, which I've done a number of times on boards that I've served, is if you find someone that you think they would be great, I mean, on paper they look amazing, but we really don't know them and they don't know us. And so we really need to have a little bit of time to get to know one another before we say this is absolutely the right person for the board. You can ask them to come and observe a couple of board meetings, or work with, maybe a past board member to learn a little bit about the culture of the board, a little bit about some of the things happening with the hospital. But having them come as an observer can be particularly helpful, even if it's just for one meeting or two meetings, not to participate in the meeting, but just to be kind of a silent party in the room and start to kind of get the vibe. And then most importantly, you follow up with that person after each observation. What did you hear? What questions can I answer for you? What did you think about that? Could you see yourself fitting in this way? Really kind of engage them on that experience. And then ambassadors, as I mentioned earlier, you want everybody sort of serving in that role of sharing information about the board as broadly as possible. So then, of course, the next step in the process is the orientation and the onboarding of the new members. And, one of the things that I've really come to believe about orientation is that we almost all of us kind of think about it as an event, as a one-time event, rather than what is actually the truth, which is kind of an onboarding process. I mean, if you really think about it, and those of you who've served on boards, I think you probably attest to this. If you think back to the last time you joined a brand new board, you didn't learn everything you needed to know at that orientation meeting. There's no way you did. Instead, it probably took you the better part of a year. And if the organization was meeting less than monthly, it might have taken multiple years before you really fully got your arms around the following issues. What is the culture of this group? What are the norms? How do I fit in? What are the things that I bring to the table that are unique and special that this group really is relying on me to do, versus what are the things that I bring to the table that might actually impede process? Those are things that take a longer time to really understand. And so if those of us who are involved in creating these orientation programs were to think about it in that way, it might dramatically change what we think about as orientation. I think right now we all sort of think of orientation as a meeting with the CEO or a meeting with the chief medical officer, a meeting with the board chair, an opportunity to share the bylaws and the board policies and a little bit of history about the hospital and maybe a list of who's who. And maybe we share some past minutes in the strategic plans. And that's about the sum total of what we think of as orientation. And certainly all of those things are important, but they're not sufficient. They're not. They don't really tell us the important stuff we need to know to be a good board member. They just get us started. They just kind of tell us the rules and regulations. They don't really tell us how we fit in. And the how we fit in part is the part we're actually most keen to know. So really, what we want to do is make sure that we do this as more of a journey. So we might start out with a meeting. In fact, we might even start out before there's a meeting by providing access online to a lot of these resources. Create a little repository someplace where board candidates can go and read the bylaws, read the strategic plan, start to get to know the who's who before they even come to a meeting. That's really helpful because then when they come in, they might already have some questions in mind that they'd like to get answers to, and that can help them with the orientation process. Then, very importantly, when they come to their very first meeting, we should acknowledge that they are at their very first meeting. And I don't just mean at the very beginning of the meeting where we kind of applaud that they're here. We should make sure that at the beginning of the meeting or maybe the end of the meeting, we have a little bit of social time. Either if it's an afternoon or an evening thing, maybe it's a little bit of a cocktail reception. If it's in the morning, maybe it's a little bit of a coffee klatch. But the idea is that social stuff really matters. When you think about it, what's going to help the team, and board as a team, gel is if they know and trust one another. So we've got to make sure that that is happening. Another couple ways to do that is to make sure that the new person coming on the board has someone assigned to them as a buddy or a mentor, not because they don't understand what it means to be a board member, but they don't yet understand how they fit specifically into this board. So having someone that's been on the board for a while, maybe even someone that just recently rotated off the board, just be there as a resource for them, to meet them right after that first meeting. How did it go? What questions can I answer for you? Anything cause you any concern? Anything that you'd like to suggest for the next meeting? And then periodically checking in with them and just be available in case that board member has a question like, hey, does that always happen at every meeting? Or, hey, this topic came up and I had a question about it, but I just didn't want to pause the flow of the meeting to ask it, and I just really want to know a little bit more about this. That sounding board is extremely helpful to that orientation process. And then finally, I suggest using something called an annual contract or a commitment letter. The idea there is that every year, every board member has a list of the things that they promise to do or that we want them to do, and they sign it. And the reason that's helpful to the board member especially, and I can say this from my own experience, is we then know exactly what you want us to do. We know how we're going to be graded. We know your expectations. And we also have articulated to you our willingness to complete certain things. If there's an expectation that you want me to join X number of committees, then I want the names of the committees on a paper that I've said, yep, I agree to be parts of these committees. Or if you want me to attend certain events, I want to know the dates. If you want me to give a certain amount of money, I want to know how much. So I want that to be clear up front, because at the end of the board year, I want to know how well I've done, and I want to have a checklist that I can go back to and say, have I actually done this? Again, if we've got a place to store all this stuff, it makes it easy. I don't have to scramble around and try to ask someone, could you give me another copy of this, that, and the other? I can do my own self-study as a board member and really make sure that I'm answering my own questions. I should be able to be curious. I should be able to go someplace and find all this stuff anytime, and that's part of my ongoing education of how I'm going to be a good board member. Now, in terms of the ongoing part, one of the things I think we are all concerned about is engagement. Unfortunately, there seems to be a little bit of a trend where we might all start out very highly engaged. If we're a new board member, we're all in. We're usually kind of joining the board and saying, okay, this is going to be interesting. I'm going to do this. And then sometimes, unfortunately, over time, we might lose a little bit of our engagement or lose a little bit of our interest. Maybe we miss a meeting here and there. Maybe things start to atrophy a little bit. So this is a model that comes out of some work called Governance as Leadership, which was written about a decade ago by Richard Chait, Bill Ryan, and Barbara Taylor out of Harvard. And what they did in their work was really take a look at a number of different organizations for those that were performing really well on every metric you can think of, revenue, standing in the community, reputation, ability to attract and retain top talent. Those that were doing exceptionally well, they were really working in this shared governance mode up in the upper right corner here. They had a very high level of staff engagement in the governance process and a high level of board engagement in the governance process. And there was an understanding of the roles of each one respected the other, and they saw each other as serving as strategic partners. That when there were policies to be set or new priorities to be discussed, they understood how they were each going to support the other in that process. And it wasn't imbalanced. There wasn't, all being led by the CEO or all being led by the board chair or not being led by anyone at all. It was very much a shared responsibility. And so the way that you can try to get there, some just specific tactics to try to help you get more into that shared governance place would be to look at the board meetings themselves. When we really think about it, this is where the engagement rubber hits the road, right? When we want to see what engagement looks like, we look at a board meeting. So if you look carefully at how you are structuring your board meetings, there may be some little tweaks that you can make that are going to help with the level of engagement. This is a little recipe that I've put together in terms of how to have a really great board meeting. There's also an accompanying blog post about this on our website at Board Effect. But basically what we're kind of laying out here is that you want to make sure, first of all, that the meeting is not too long. We're suggesting, maybe not longer than 90 minutes. Yours might be shorter than that, and that's fine. You don't want to have it be so short, though, that it doesn't have meaning. Look, no board member that I've ever met joins a board because they love attending meetings. And no one joins a board because they love attending long board meetings, except the time of the meeting doesn't matter nearly as much as the quality of the meeting. I think we can all think about meetings that we've attended that have lasted hours but have been amazing, almost life-changing because so much good stuff happened in them. So if you have a meeting that includes time for community activity and bonding, includes some opportunity for the board to reconnect back with the mission of the organization, maybe a board member has attended an event or gone on rounds at the hospital, or maybe just sat down and talked with one of the front desk staff at the emergency department and learned something pivotal, and then spends 2 minutes at a board meeting saying, hey, this is something I learned last month. I went and met with this person, and here's what I learned, and this is what it meant to me. And I thought I'd share that with all of you. That reconnection back to the mission kind of helps everybody get their heads right in the right place again. And as we all know, we remember stories more than we remember anything else. So if we engage our board members in finding stories and telling stories, we're going to help engage the whole group. And then most importantly, the bulk of the meeting should be on governing. And when I say governing, I don't mean sitting there passively listening to someone read a report. That's not governing. Governing is where we are all working together to make a decision about something that is important to move forward the goals and the priorities of the organization. So reports that we can just read on our own, we should do that and put them into a consent agenda. The stuff that we need to work together to find solutions, that's the stuff we should spend our time on in meetings. So the stuff we can do on our own, we should take responsibility for that and do it on our own, but then the other stuff we should really do together. In addition, then, you want to think about how to evaluate. The good thing about evaluation is that if you have front-loaded this process the way that I'm describing, evaluation should really be pretty simple. A lot of times what I will see are these big, long, super detailed, 100-plus questionnaires around board evaluation. And I'm not saying that those are bad, especially if a lot of those metrics are things that you're using to provide benchmarks and track changes over time and maybe report some of that information back to accreditors or to regulators. That's all fine. But here's the thing. You shouldn't feel like you have to have a questionnaire that long, because really, if you're front-loading this process and you are making sure that you have oriented and onboarded people appropriately, that they know exactly what they're supposed to do throughout the year and they're actually holding themselves accountable, then evaluation should be a piece of cake. I think what happens is that we make our evaluation forms really, really long because we haven't done any of the other stuff. We didn't front-load the process, so now here we are at the end of the year thinking, this board is kind of stinky, and we want things to be better. And so we should really get some benchmarks so we can figure out, we need some data so we can then go have some hard conversations with people and tell them that this is just not working. And, well, look, all that is true. It's much easier to have those hard conversations if you have data behind it. The data shouldn't be the thing that is driving the change. The data should be the thing that is demonstrating the change you are driving. So it's not the cart before the horse. If the data comes after, the actual change in the driving comes first. So you really want to think about your evaluation as simply a tool to prove all the stuff you've been doing throughout the year. That's all it should be. And I always think a member self-assessment is helpful if the member is assessing their own performance against their own commitments. So if they've made a commitment at the beginning of the year, then that evaluation process should be easy. It's like a true-false test. Did I do it or didn't I? And when they look at that list, and if there are places where they didn't, fulfill a commitment, they have a choice. They can either quickly fulfill a commitment, like maybe it's a gift that they need to give, or they can say, you know what, that wasn't realistic, and here's why, and so next year I need to change it up a little bit. And then in addition to that, you may, on occasion, and I wouldn't say you have to do it every single year, but if you're in kind of a place of renewal, or you're trying to really think about how to change things, particularly maybe you've just gone through a merger, and now you have some merged board members into a bigger group, and you're trying to figure out how to change that dynamic and how to maybe make the board a bit smaller. Doing peer evaluations can be helpful, but only if everybody has an absolutely clear sense of what that particular board member's job description was. They don't know what the job description was for that board member. How can they possibly evaluate that person's performance? They got to know what that person was expected to do before they can say whether or not they did it. And then when it comes to doing any sort of member removals, which, look, these days that's becoming much more common. We often have mergers and acquisitions happening that require us to shrink the size of a board, and that's happening all the time. So there's a way to do it, better, and there's a way to do it worse. The better way to do it is to, again, if you've been doing all this other stuff all throughout the year, the removals become a lot easier too. because you can have some data that you can go back to, and maybe that data is evaluation data, maybe it's taking a look at job descriptions and individual performance. So maybe that's a part of what you do. You certainly have to rely on your bylaws and policies, and more often than not, we're not actually enforcing our own bylaws. We might have in our bylaws that if you miss X number of meetings, it's an immediate and easy removal, and we might not be adhering to that. So that's something to take a look at. We also should have very clear rules in our bylaws about how we remove people. How does that work? Does it require a vote? By whom? Is it a vote of the full board? Is it the same group of people that voted that person in? What if it's someone who was appointed? Is there any opportunity for removals in that case, and how does that work? We need to make sure that we're all clear about that. And really, any sort of a removal should be seen as the activity that is a partnership of more than one person. It should never just be one person's job to go through the removal process. Ideally, it's the board chair, maybe in partnership with the governance chair or with the CEO. And finally, we can always just take advantage of attrition. If the goal is that we have a 24-person board and we know that is unwieldy and we really want to narrow it down to 15, where we know we'd be much more comfortable, much more successful, maybe the thing to do is to look at the long view and say, you know what, in the next 3 years we'll be at 15 just by letting people's terms rotate off and just not backfilling them. And I think that is a much kinder way to go. If you can do it through attrition, it's usually a much better way to go. But if you can't do it through attrition and you do have to actually remove people, always just remember that you're dealing with people. You know this. But have a good face-saving exit ramp. So have a thing that they can do in exchange for being a board member. Maybe it's being part of a group called the Board Member Emeriti Council, and they serve as board buddies for new people coming into the board. Maybe they become part of something called board ambassadors, and their job is to recruit new members. Maybe you create a council, an advisory council, whose job it is to evaluate the success of the board once a year. Maybe that's a way to handle evaluation. Maybe they conduct the evaluation and that's their job, but they only do it once a year. The idea would be think about what would be a good place for that person to go to if they're no longer going to be a board member. A shorthand that comes sort of from the fundraising world is elevate, honor, and remove. So you can always sort of say, all right, we're going to kind of lift you up and say, you've done an amazing job as a board member, even if it's not true, and we're going to honor you for your time, because even if they haven't been a great board member, they have indeed given you their time. And we're going to then have you serve on this other thing, but you're no longer going to be on the governing board. So it's a way of them really saving face. And you certainly want to thank people. Unless they have got to be removed for some horrible, gross negligence, you want to say thank you. For whatever reason you have to remove somebody, they should always be thanked for their time. In the meantime, retaining good board members should be the easiest part. If you are doing all this work and you are orienting people appropriately, you have opportunities for ongoing engagement, you have focused on the board culture and thought through what is our purpose as a board and how do we articulate that to new people coming on the board, how do we live that at every meeting, then retaining the good people should be a piece of cake. So hopefully some of this has been helpful. I'm confident that there are things you've heard in this webinar that are not brand new, but sometimes things bear repeating, and sometimes it's good to be reminded of stuff we once knew but maybe haven't done in a while. So hopefully you'll be able to take some of the strategies that we've shared here today. Certainly take a look out there for tools. There are a lot of really good tools out there to help you with every part of this ongoing cycle. And then communicate back with us. Tell us what else would be helpful. I know the folks at the American Hospital Association would love to hear from you. I would too. So if something about this webinar resonated with you and you'd like to learn more, please connect with us. We would absolutely love to hear from you. Thank you so much for your time, and I hope this has been helpful.